I am Serena, 27 years old. Until 6 weeks ago, I was merely a kindergarten teacher living from paycheck to paycheck in a small apartment. My grandparents raised me more than my own parents ever did. They were affluent yet modest, instilling in me the belief that character is more important than wealth. When they tragically passed away in that awful accident, I was devastated. Then came the meeting with the lawyer, where I discovered they had bequeathed me their entire $26 million estate. Suddenly, the family who rarely visited them wanted everything. I stood my ground. If you want to see how money can unveil true intentions, stick around. Before I proceed, please share where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about standing firm when family reveals their true nature. Growing up, my parents were always physically present but emotionally distant. My father, Leonard, worked 60-hour weeks climbing the corporate ladder, while my mother, Diane, spent her time mingling with the right social circles. Family dinners were infrequent, and when they did occur, my parents were often preoccupied with work calls or social arrangements. They provided the essentials, but warmth and guidance were scarce. From the age of 5, I spent every weekend and entire summers with my grandparents, Elizabeth and Harold. Their humble four-bedroom home became my true sanctuary. Despite their considerable wealth, they lived a simple life. Their 3-acre property featured a vegetable garden where Grandpa Harold taught me how to cultivate tomatoes and zucchini. Grandma Elizabeth showed me how to bake cookies from scratch and sew on buttons. They were present at every school play and soccer game that my parents missed. My grandparents built their fortune from the ground up. They launched a small logistics company in their garage during the 1970s with just one truck and a dream. By the time I was born, Alexander Logistics had evolved into a regional powerhouse with a fleet of 200 trucks and 5 warehouses across 3 states. Yet, you would never guess their net worth just by looking at them. For 2 decades, Grandpa drove the same pickup truck. Grandma diligently clipped coupons and shopped for clothes on sale. They often reminded me, money is merely a tool, Serena, not a reflection of your value. Use it to create something significant, not to impress those who don't matter. This belief was exactly what caused the divide with my father. As their only son, he grew up anticipating to inherit everything and live a life of luxury. He held a grudge against their thriftiness, labeling them as stingy and outdated. What he perceived as lack, they viewed as a means of building character. They funded his college education but expected him to work summer jobs. Upon his graduation, they assisted him with a down payment on a modest starter home, not the upscale condo he desired. The ultimate fallout occurred when my father insisted on a senior role at their company despite lacking relevant experience. My grandparents declined, stating he needed to earn it like everyone else. He left in a huff, opting for a corporate job instead, and their relationship was forever altered. In contrast, they took a different route with me. They fully financed my education, enabling me to graduate without debt. However, they urged me to pursue a career driven by passion rather than financial gain. When I chose to become a kindergarten teacher, they were genuinely excited, even though my starting salary was just above minimum wage. Throughout my adult life, I enjoyed a close bond with my grandparents. We had regular Sunday dinners every week. I assisted them in navigating new technology, setting up their smartphones, and teaching them how to video chat. They shared their family recipes with me and recounted tales from their youth. During holidays, I always opted to stay with them instead of at my parents' house, which created ongoing tension with my mother, who viewed it as a personal slight. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment about 20 minutes from my grandparents' home. It was small yet cozy, filled with second-hand furniture and plants. My salary at Sunshine Elementary School was modest, but it met my needs. I discovered happiness in the little things, such as borrowing books from the library, exploring the state park on hikes, and helping out at the animal shelter. My grandparents appreciated my independent way of life, although they sometimes surprised me with useful gifts like new winter tires or a high-quality blender. 6 weeks ago, everything shifted. I was grading papers on a Tuesday evening when I received a call from the police. My grandparents had been returning home from their favorite restaurant when a drunk driver ran a red light, colliding with their car at full speed. They passed away instantly. The officer assured me they did not suffer, but that offered little solace. The funeral felt like a blur. I recall my parents taking control of the arrangements, disputing costs with the funeral director. My brother Jason flew in from California, spending most of his time glued to his phone. Aunt Pam cried dramatically for the cameras, but her tears ceased the moment the cameras were put away. Uncle Steve stood awkwardly in corners, trailing Aunt Pam like a shadow. None of them had visited my grandparents in years. Yet suddenly, they were acting like the grieving family. I felt completely numb. The two people who truly understood and supported me were gone forever. Their home, once warm and welcoming, now stood empty. I couldn't bring myself to step inside after the funeral. Instead, I returned to my apartment, took bereavement leave from school, and tried to come to terms with my new reality. 2 weeks after the funeral, I got a call from Matthew Goldstein, my grandparents' attorney. He asked me to come to his office with my immediate family for the reading of the will. Little did I know how that meeting would change everything I thought I knew about my family. The morning of the will reading was gray and drizzly, perfectly reflecting my mood. I arrived at Goldstein Legal 15 minutes early, dressed in a simple black dress, and holding the umbrella my grandmother had insisted I keep in my car for emergencies. The office was situated in a transformed Victorian house in the downtown area, featuring a cozy interior adorned with wood paneling and leather seating. Matthew Goldstein welcomed me with a soft handshake. In his 60s, he had silver hair and kind eyes framed by wire-rimmed glasses. My grandparents often spoke of him as both their lawyer and a friend for over 3 decades. "I truly regret your loss, Serena," he said softly. "Elizabeth and Harold were remarkable individuals. I will miss our chess matches and her lemon bars during our meetings." His heartfelt sentiment brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I managed to say. "They had great things to say about you as well." Just as we were about to continue, the glass door swung open, and my family burst in all at once. My father, Leonard, was the first to enter, glancing at his pricey watch with impatience. At 56, he resembled an older, more hardened version of my grandfather, lacking his warmth. My mother, Diane, followed, her designer handbag likely worth more than my monthly rent. My 25-year-old brother, Jason, swaggered in, sporting sunglasses indoors. His version of business attire consisted of a wrinkled button-up shirt half tucked into jeans. Following them was Aunt Pam, my father's younger sister, already loudly discussing some imagined slight from her country club friends on her phone. Uncle Steve came in last, politely nodding at me but quickly looking away. They had been married for 2 decades, yet I had seldom heard him say more than a few words at family events. "Well, let's get this over with," my father declared, skipping any pleasantries. "Some of us have real businesses to manage." Matthew offered a thin smile. "Certainly, Leonard. Please follow me to the conference room. Now that we are all here." The atmosphere in the room was tense as we gathered around a large oak table. My father took a seat at one end, asserting his authority, while I opted for a spot near Matthew at the head of the table. The others positioned themselves according to their usual alliances, my mother next to my father, Jason beside her, Aunt Pam, and Uncle Steve across from them. "Before we start," Matthew stated, "I want to make it clear that Elizabeth and Harold were completely of sound mind when they revised their will last year. They were meticulous in their deliberations and clear about their intentions." My father scoffed. "Just read it, Matt. We know how this plays out. Dad built the business. I am his son, following the standard inheritance protocol." Matthew disregarded the interruption and opened a leather portfolio. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. "I, Harold Alexander, and I, Elizabeth Alexander, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this our last will and testament. The formal legal jargon continued for several minutes, with Matthew outlining the revocation of previous wills and the appointment of executors. My family fidgeted with impatience. At last, he arrived at the section everyone had been anticipating. We hereby bequeath our entire estate, which includes, but is not limited to, all cash assets totaling around $8 million. Our investment portfolio, valued at about $12 million. All real estate holdings, including our primary residence, valued at $5 million, and our 25% ownership stake in Alexander Logistics, estimated at around $1 million, to our cherished granddaughter, Serena Grace Foster. The room fell utterly silent. I held my breath for a moment, convinced I had misheard. Matthew went on, "We specifically and intentionally make no provisions for our son Leonard Alexander, our daughter-in-law Diane Alexander, our grandson Jason Alexander, our daughter Pamela Davis, or our son-in-law Stephen Davis, as we have supported them during our lifetime and have communicated our reasons clearly to our attorney." "Let me see that," my father yelled, standing up so suddenly that his chair toppled over. He grabbed the document from Matthew's hands, scanning it in a frenzy. "This is absurd." My mother chimed in. $26 million to a kindergarten teacher. She wouldn't know the first thing about handling that amount of money. Jason slammed his hand on the table. "What about me? I am part of the family as well. I require startup funds for my business endeavors." Aunt Pam glared at me, her face reddened with fury. "What did you do? How did you manage to twist their actions like this?" I sat there in stunned silence, unable to comprehend the unfolding events. $26 million. My humble grandparents had amassed that amount, and they bequeathed it all to me. Matthew calmly took the will from my father's hands. If everyone could please take their seats. There is more to discuss. Harold and Elizabeth recorded a video message to be shown at this moment. He pressed a button on a remote, and the large screen on the wall lit up. My grandparents appeared, sitting together on their living room sofa. My heart tightened at the sight of them alive again, looking just as they did the last time I visited. Grandpa Harold was the first to speak. "If you are seeing this, it means we have passed away. We want to clarify our decisions directly to avoid any confusion." Grandma Elizabeth continued, "Leonard, Pam, we love you as our children, but we have been profoundly disappointed by the values you have adopted and passed on to your own children, except for Serena." For decades, my grandparents explained that they had observed my father and aunt prioritize material wealth over relationships, treating them as a resource to exploit rather than as parents to be valued. They recounted years of missed family gatherings, loans that were never repaid, and dismissive attitudes toward their simple lifestyle choices. "The business we established," Grandpa said, "was never intended to accumulate wealth for its own sake. It was about ensuring security for our family and creating opportunities for our employees. We built it through hard work, integrity, and fair treatment of people. Serena is the only one who has consistently demonstrated these values." Grandma added, "She visits us not out of self-interest, but because she truly cares. She has chosen a career dedicated to helping children, despite the low salary. Because it serves her purpose. We have faith in Serena to manage what we've created," Grandpa went on. "She will respect our legacy and utilize these resources wisely, avoiding waste on superficial luxuries or get-rich-quick schemes." The video went on for several more minutes, with my grandparents sharing their aspirations for how the inheritance could be used to support education and community development initiatives they had always valued but had little time to pursue while managing their business. As the screen faded to black, my father erupted. "This is utter nonsense. They were clearly senile. We will challenge this will. No judge will uphold this madness." Matthew stayed completely composed. "They expected that reaction, Leonard. They underwent thorough cognitive evaluations before finalizing this will, with multiple independent doctors confirming their mental competence. Furthermore, they recorded years of behaviors that influenced their decision. I must inform you that contesting the will be extremely challenging, costly, and unlikely to succeed. My mother turned to me, her voice suddenly sweet as honey. Serena, darling, you know this isn't right. Your grandparents were confused. This money belongs to the family, not just to you. You will share it with us, won't you? I felt trapped, all eyes on me. I have to think about this, I stammered. I had no idea they would do this. Think about it, Jason scoffed. There's nothing to consider. That money should be split equally or managed by someone with real business experience, my father interrupted, implying himself. As the argument escalated, Matthew gently placed his hand on my arm. You don't have to make any decisions today, Serena. Take your time to process this. My office will take care of all immediate matters concerning the estate. He handed me a thick envelope. This contains all the necessary documents, keys to their house, and contact details for their financial advisors. Call me anytime if you have questions. The meeting descended into chaos after that, with threats of lawsuits and accusations being hurled around. Eventually, Matthew asked everyone to leave, mentioning he had another appointment. As we exited, my father seized my arm roughly. This discussion isn't finished, he hissed. Come to our house tonight at 6. We will resolve this as a family. His tone made it evident that this was not a suggestion. I nodded numbly, too overwhelmed to protest. As they drove away in their separate luxury cars, I remained in my 10-year-old sedan in the parking lot, clutching the envelope and pondering how what was meant to be a blessing of inheritance had swiftly turned into a curse. I spent the afternoon in a daze, aimlessly driving around town before finally stopping at a quiet park to collect my thoughts. The envelope from Matthew lay unopened on my passenger seat. Part of me was tempted to sneak a peek inside to grasp what my grandparents had entrusted to me. Another part was filled with dread at the responsibility it entailed. At 5:45, I pulled into my parents' driveway, noticing that everyone else had already gathered. Their 5,000-square-foot house towered before me, all granite and glass, designed more to impress than to welcome. I took a deep breath, grabbed the envelope, and walked inside. They were waiting in the formal living room, a space seldom used except for my mother's social events. My father stood by the fireplace, a tumbler of scotch in hand. My mother perched on the edge of an uncomfortable-looking designer chair. Jason lounged on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, while Aunt Pam paced anxiously. Uncle Steve stood by the window, staring out as if he wished to be anywhere else. Finally, my father spoke as I entered. Sit down, Serena. I chose a chair near the door, suddenly aware that I might need a quick escape. Let's be reasonable about this. My father began, his business negotiation voice in full swing. Your grandparents clearly weren't thinking straight. They intended for the family to benefit, not just you. My mother nodded enthusiastically. Sweetheart, managing wealth is complex. Your father possesses the expertise to manage this situation appropriately. You could still secure a substantial amount, possibly enough for a down payment on a real house rather than that apartment. The condescension in her tone made me uneasy, yet I chose to stay quiet. Encouraged by my silence, my father pressed on. Here's our proposal. You will transfer the estate to me as the financial leader of the family. I will guarantee that everyone receives their fair share. You will get 10%, which is quite generous given your limited requirements. 10%. At last, I found my voice. That would still amount to over $2 million. Exactly, Jason interjected. More than sufficient for a teacher. I need at least $5 million for my cryptocurrency exchange platform. It's going to be massive. I regarded him with skepticism. Jason had flitted between get-rich-quick schemes for years, never maintaining a job for more than 3 months. His last endeavor, an app for raiding public restrooms, had floundered after consuming $50,000 of my parents' funds. The house should belong to us, Aunt Pam interrupted. We have 3 children to think about. That neighborhood would provide them with access to better schools. I nearly laughed at the ridiculousness. Aunt Pam had never once visited my grandparents in that house. Her children, my cousins, were mere strangers who sent obligatory birthday cards penned in my aunt's handwriting. As the evening wore on, their strategies shifted. When demands failed, they resorted to guilt. "After everything we've done for you," my mother said, her eyes dramatically glistening. "We gave you life, a good home, and opportunities. Is this how you repay family loyalty?" I almost choked on my water. Loyalty? When was the last time either of you called just to check on me? When did you ever come to one of my school performances? My father altered his approach once more. "We are not asking, Serena. We are informing you of what will occur. Either you voluntarily sign the transfer documents, or we will contest the will. We will bring up every questionable interaction you had with your grandparents. How frequently did you go to see them by yourself? What did you share with them about us when we weren't present? Things are about to get messy." The threat lingered ominously. I felt nauseous, yet something within me steeled itself. A recollection emerged of my grandfather instructing me to stand firm during a playground argument when I was 8. "No one can strip you of your dignity unless you allow it, Serena," he had told me. "Understand what is right and stand your ground." Uncle Steve, who had been quiet until then, suddenly interjected. "Perhaps we should all take a breath and give Serena a moment to gather her thoughts. This is quite a lot to digest." My father turned sharply towards him. "Stay out of this, Steve. This is a matter for the family." "I am family," he replied softly, but quickly withdrew under my father's fierce gaze. As the clock ticked past 9, Jason began preparing transfer documents on his laptop. My mother reached out to their personal lawyer for guidance on the phrasing. Aunt Pam browsed real estate listings for my grandparents' home, discussing which walls she would demolish first. They had already allocated my inheritance without my approval, outlining how they would utilize every dollar. Not once did anyone bring up my grandparents' desires or legacy. Not once did they inquire about my thoughts on how the money should be handled. At 10:30, my father printed the rough transfer document and slid it across the coffee table to me with a pen. "Sign it," he insisted. I picked up the document and examined it closely. The wording was vague, effectively relinquishing all my rights to anything my grandparents had bequeathed to me. In return, I would receive a percentage to be determined later at my father's sole discretion. I set the document down and inhaled deeply. The room fell silent. "What did you just say?" my father inquired, his tone dangerously low. I said, "No, I will not sign this or anything similar. My grandparents entrusted me with their legacy for a reason. I plan to uphold that trust." My mother erupted into a rant about ungratefulness. Jason hurled insults at me that I won't repeat. Aunt Pam started crying dramatically about her children's future. Throughout it all, I remained motionless, the word no forming a protective barrier around me. Eventually, my father slammed his glass down with such force that it shattered. "That's enough," he bellowed. "I always warned Dad that you couldn't be trusted. You manipulated them just like you're trying to manipulate us now with this innocent facade." He advanced toward me, his finger pointing just inches from my face. "You have a decision to make right now, Serena. Either you sign that document and stay part of this family, or you take your precious inheritance and consider yourself disowned. You can't have both." The ultimatum lingered heavily in the air between us. I glanced around at my family members' faces, hoping to find any trace of love or understanding. I found nothing. In that instant, I came to a painful realization. They had never truly regarded me as family. I was merely a means to an end, a potential source of money, nothing more. "I am not signing," I declared firmly, rising to my feet. "I regret that you feel this way, but I must honor what Grandma and Grandpa wanted." Then get out of my house, my father spat. Pack your belongings and leave tonight. You are no longer welcome here. I live in my own apartment, I reminded him. I have for years. He let out a cold laugh. The apartment we co-signed for because your teacher's salary couldn't qualify for the lease. Check your agreement, Serena. We own that building through one of our investment companies. Consider your lease terminated. My stomach sank. He was correct. When I couldn't qualify for the apartment on my own, they had offered to assist me. I never realized they actually owned the building through a shell company. You have 30 minutes to gather your essentials, my mother said, glancing at her watch. The locks will be changed tomorrow. I stood there, frozen in disbelief. They were genuinely kicking me out, rendering me homeless over money they had never earned. The clock is ticking, Jason sneered. Better hurry, sis. Those $26 million won't keep you warm tonight. Packing up my life in just 30 minutes felt incredibly rushed. I moved almost on autopilot, hastily gathering clothes, toiletries, essential documents, and a few cherished items. My mind was a whirlwind of disbelief. How could they do this? How could money transform my family into total strangers? My father stood at my bedroom door, arms crossed, watching me like a guard, ensuring that a prisoner wouldn't take anything during the transfer. Meanwhile, my mother was downstairs, already on the phone with a real estate agent about selling my grandparents' house, her voice echoing up the stairs. You were never really part of this family anyway, my father said coldly as I shoved clothes into a duffel bag. Your mother and I were planning to divorce before she got pregnant with you. You were the obligation that kept us together. His casual cruelty hit me like a punch. I had always felt unwanted, but hearing it stated so bluntly was a different experience altogether. We have wasted enough time and money on you, my mother chimed in, appearing in the doorway. Your private school tuition, those summer camps, all those dance lessons you were awful at. Consider this the end of our investment. Investment, not love or care, but investment, as if I were a poorly performing stock. Then Jason showed up, leaning against the wall with a smug look on his face. You will regret this when you have nothing and no one, he warned. That money will disappear faster than you think. And then what? You'll come crawling back, and we'll remember how you chose cash over family. I zipped up my last bag, fighting back tears, determined not to cry in front of them. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Is that everything? My father demanded. I glanced around the room that had been mine since childhood, even though I had only stayed here occasionally since college. The ballet trophies from elementary school, the framed diploma, the bookshelf filled with novels and textbooks, the photo albums, so much left behind. I can come back for the rest later, I said. My father laughed. There won't be a later. Anything you leave behind tonight will either go to charity or be thrown away. It's your decision. The reality of it struck me hard. They were completely removing me from their lives, all because I refused to give them money they hadn't earned. I took my grandmother's quilt from the bed and shoved it into my already stuffed bag. I couldn't leave that behind. With 3 bags hanging from my shoulders and another in my hand, I headed downstairs. No one offered to assist me. At the front door, I glanced back one last time. My family was lined up, their faces displaying a mix of anger, disappointment, and smug satisfaction. You may have money now, my mother said. But family lasts forever. You'll come to understand what you've discarded. I'm not the one discarding family, I quietly replied. You are. With that, I stepped out the door and into the cool night air. The door slammed shut behind me with a jarring finality. Standing next to my car in the driveway, I suddenly felt the crushing weight of everything. I was essentially homeless. My apartment was no longer mine. My family had cut ties with me. In just a few hours, I had gained millions but lost the only support system I had ever known, flawed as it was. I sat in my car and finally let the tears flow. They streamed down my cheeks as I clutched the steering wheel, great heaving sobs shaking my entire body. I cried for my grandparents, whose absence felt more profound than ever. I cried for the family I had always wished for but never truly had. Mostly, I cried for myself. Suddenly adrift in a world that had completely transformed, what felt like hours had probably only been minutes. I wiped my eyes and started the car. I had nowhere to go. Hotels required credit cards with available limits that I didn't possess. Friends were an option, but explaining this situation seemed impossible at nearly midnight. Then I remembered the envelope Matthew had given me. As I pulled it out, I discovered a set of keys adorned with a rabbit-shaped keychain that my grandmother had treasured. These were the keys to my grandparents' house, a place that now astonishingly belonged to me. The drive to their neighborhood took about 20 minutes. With every mile, I felt a mix of comfort from their home and fear about entering it without their presence. Since the funeral, I had steered clear of the house, unable to confront the void. When I arrived, the porch light was on, likely set on a timer by my grandfather. I lingered in the driveway for several minutes, mustering my courage. At last, I picked up one bag and walked toward the front door, the key trembling in my hand. The house had the same familiar scent, a blend of my grandmother's lemon, verbena, potpourri, and the wood polish my grandfather applied to the furniture every Sunday. I switched on the lights, half expecting to hear their voices greeting me from the kitchen. The silence was overwhelming. I headed to the guest room I always used, dropping my bag onto the bed. Everything was just as I had left it after my last visit a month prior to the accident. The novel I had been reading remained on the nightstand, a bookmark marking my place. Fresh towels were neatly folded on the dresser, placed there by my grandmother in anticipation of my next visit. The thoughtfulness of it, the expectation of continuity that they could never have known would be shattered, broke me once more. I collapsed onto the bed and wept until fatigue took over, falling asleep fully dressed on top of the covers. Morning arrived with blinding brightness. For a fleeting moment, I anticipated the aroma of coffee brewing and my grandfather's off-key whistling from downstairs. Reality hit hard as I recognized the silence. They were gone, and somehow I had inherited both their wealth and their adversaries, all embodied in my own family. My phone had exploded overnight with texts and missed calls, mostly from my father and mother, alternating between threats and sudden overtures of reconciliation. "We can resolve this if you approach it reasonably." Take a look at one message from my mother. My father was more direct. "You have 24 hours to think it over before we initiate legal action." Jason sent just one text. Relishing the vast empty house. But not for long. That last message sent a shiver through me. It felt like a threat, not mere bravado. I forwarded it to Matthew, who replied right away. "Stay put. I will arrive in 30 minutes. Do not let anyone else in." His urgency was unsettling, yet it also brought a strange sense of comfort. At least I had someone in my corner. Matthew showed up precisely 30 minutes later, carrying a briefcase and a cardboard drink holder with 2 coffees. I led him into the kitchen where we settled at the breakfast nook my grandparents had used for informal meals. "First things first," he said, sliding a coffee toward me. "Your family has already reached out to 3 different lawyers about contesting the will. I expected this and have prepared countermeasures." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup. "They threw me out last night. My father apparently owns my apartment building through some investment firm." Matthew nodded solemnly. Typical Leonard tactics. Using leverage to enforce compliance, he began pulling documents from his briefcase. "What he didn't mention is that your grandparents planned for this exact situation." He presented me with a deed to a small cottage about 20 minutes outside of town. "Your grandmother purchased this property 5 years ago as an investment but kept it in a separate trust for you. Leonard is unaware of it. You have a place to go if you need it." A wave of relief washed over me. At least I wouldn't be homeless. However, the thought of hiding out while my family circled like vultures didn't sit well with me. There's something else you should be aware of, Matthew continued. You are not alone in this. Your grandparents had many loyal friends and associates who understood the dynamics with your family. Just then, a knock echoed at the back door. Matthew smiled. That would be Carlos. Carlos. The name rang a bell. Carlos Ramirez, Matthew clarified. He has served as your grandparents' estate manager and handyman for the past 15 years. He resides in the guest house located at the back of the property. When I opened the door, I was greeted by a man in his early 50s, sporting salt and pepper hair and kind eyes. He held his hat in his hands with respect. Miss Serena, he said with warmth. I am truly sorry for your loss. Your grandparents were remarkable individuals. I noticed your car this morning and wanted to see if you needed anything. His simple act of kindness nearly brought me to tears once more. Thank you, Carlos. To be honest, I am feeling a bit overwhelmed. Carlos nodded in understanding. Mr. Harold and Mrs. Elizabeth were concerned about that. They asked me to look after you in case anything happened to them. The house, the grounds, everything is well maintained. I have been keeping an eye on things. Matthew invited Carlos to join us at the table. Over the next hour, Carlos recounted stories about my grandparents that I had never heard before, painting a picture of two individuals who were respected and cherished by those who worked for them, not just their privileged family members. Your father and brother, Carlos said carefully. They came here after the funeral when no one else was around. They took items. Watches, jewelry, some electronics. I have it all recorded on the security cameras. My stomach tightened. My father had installed a comprehensive security system for my grandparents years ago, supposedly for their safety. I had forgotten about the cameras. Carlos shook his head sadly. They were unaware that Mr. Harold had me update the system last year. He didn't trust the old one your father had installed. He said it had too many blind spots. Matthew made a note of this. That footage could prove valuable if they decide to take legal action. There's more, Carlos continued. Mrs. Elizabeth kept meticulous journals. She documented everything, particularly family visits and interactions. They are located in her study. I followed Carlos to my grandmother's small study off the main hallway. A built-in bookcase was filled with numerous leather-bound journals, each one carefully dated. Carlos took one from the shelf and handed it to me. This particular journal states, when your father requested money last year, he remarked, for some investment opportunity. I immediately opened the journal, recognizing my grandmother's graceful handwriting. May 15th, Leonard came to visit today for the first time in 7 months. He didn't inquire about our health or lives. Instead, he quickly launched into a pitch about a cryptocurrency investment that required $250,000. When Harold declined, Leonard turned hostile, accusing us of favoring Serena, claiming we were foolish to trust her since she only visits to secure her inheritance. He couldn't have been more mistaken. Serena has never asked for money, is unaware of our financial situation, brings food every Sunday, and stays to share a meal with us. Leonard left without finishing his coffee, and Harold was very upset afterward. I continued reading entry after entry, each chronicling years of similar encounters. My father demanding money. My brother proposing ridiculous business ideas. My mother making subtle remarks about their modest lifestyle being a source of embarrassment for her social status. In stark contrast, my visits were described with genuine affection. My grandmother noted the small gifts I had brought, the conversations we had enjoyed, and the help I had provided around the house. She perceived me in a way my parents never did. As I was reading, the doorbell rang. Carlos went to answer it and returned with an older woman dressed practically in a dress and cardigan. Dorothy Reynolds, he introduced her. Your grandparents' housekeeper for 20 years. Dorothy embraced me tightly. "You look just like Elizabeth did when she was young," she said, expressing her pride in me. Over the next few hours, more guests arrived. Rosa Martinez, my grandparents' business partner, who was familiar with every detail of Alexander Logistics, offered to help me understand the company. George Patel, their investment advisor, brought detailed portfolios that clearly outlined how my inheritance was structured. Sarah Johnson, our neighbor for 3 decades, brought a homemade casserole along with tales of neighborhood gatherings I had attended during my childhood. Each guest who arrived not only shared information but also genuine warmth. They all cherished my grandparents and, by extension, cared for my well-being. While rummaging through my grandmother's desk, Dorothy discovered a hidden compartment filled with letters from my father that spanned many years. Each letter requested money, some containing thinly veiled threats about cutting off access to me if they were denied. She also handed me a USB drive containing security footage from after the funeral. Your mother was already sifting through Elizabeth's jewelry before the reception had even concluded. She took several valuable items, asserting that Elizabeth would have wanted her to have them. It appeared that my grandparents had been documenting my family's behavior for years, perhaps anticipating this very day. They had established not only a financial safety net for me but also a support network and evidence to uphold their wishes. Around 4 p.m., as Matthew was guiding me through the intricate financial documents, my phone pinged with a text from Jason. "Hope you are enjoying Grandma and Grandpa's house while you can. Dad, Mom, Aunt Pam, Uncle Steve, and I are coming over tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock to collect what rightfully belongs to us. Better not try to stop us or things will get ugly." I showed the message to Matthew, whose expression darkened. "Threats and potential breaking and entering," he murmured. "I think it's time to activate the final part of your grandparents' plan." He made several quick phone calls, speaking cryptically about meetings and evidence. When he finished, he turned to me with a resolute look. "Your grandparents foresaw this exact situation, Serena. They knew Leonard and the others would not accept their decision. They prepared for it. Tomorrow morning, we will be ready for them. However, I recommend that you take some time tonight to go over these materials so you can fully grasp what you are standing up for." He pointed towards the stack of journals, financial records, and legal documents laid out on the dining room table. Your grandparents created more than just financial wealth, they fostered relationships built on trust and respect. That is their genuine legacy to you. As everyone except Carlos departed for the night, vowing to return the following morning, I experienced an unusual sense of calm washing over me. I realized I was not alone in this battle. My grandparents had made sure to pass down not only their wealth but also their wisdom and their community. I dedicated the evening to poring over journals and financial statements, discovering my grandparents in a fresh light. They had been strategic, thoughtful, and meticulous in their preparations. Every action they took was intentional, including their choice of heir. For the first time since the will was read, I felt capable of shouldering the responsibility they had placed upon me. I was determined not to disappoint them. As I got ready for bed, another message arrived from Jason Better. "Keep one eye open, sis. Tomorrow, you will witness the consequences for those who steal from this family." Instead of feeling fear, I sensed a resolve solidifying within me. Tomorrow would indeed reveal the repercussions of attempting to rob from family, but not in the way Jason anticipated. I woke up early the next morning, filled with anxiety yet resolute. By 8 a.m., Matthew had shown up with coffee and pastries, along with a hefty folder of legal documents. "These are restraining orders prepared to be filed if needed," he clarified. "And these are cease and desist letters addressing the specific threats Jason made." Dorothy arrived right after, taking charge of the kitchen to whip up breakfast. The comforting aromas of bacon and coffee enveloped the house, offering an odd sense of solace before the impending storm. By 9:30, the house was bustling with supporters. Carlos took his place by the front door, standing as a silent guardian. Rosa Martinez, the business partner of my grandparents, set her laptop on the dining table, prepared to present financial documents if necessary. Dorothy was bustling about, making sure everyone had coffee and snacks, her very presence a reminder of my grandparents' hospitality. At 9:45, vehicles started to arrive in the long driveway. First came my father's sleek black luxury sedan, followed by my mother's white SUV, then Aunt Pam and Uncle Steve in their flashy red convertible, a symbol of their midlife crisis, and lastly, Jason's impractical sports car, which he could only afford thanks to my parents covering his rent. "They're early," Matthew noted, trying to catch us off guard. As the doorbell rang insistently, followed by loud knocking, Matthew gestured to Carlos, who opened the door. My father stood at the entrance, momentarily taken aback to see someone other than me responding. Behind him, the rest of my family gathered, their expressions a mix of anger and smugness. "Where is Serena?" my father demanded. "This is a family matter." Carlos stood firm. "Miss Serena is expecting you. Please come in." My family entered the foyer, halting abruptly when they noticed the assembly in the living room. I was positioned in the center, with Matthew slightly behind me to my right. "What is this?" my mother inquired, her voice tense. "You brought outsiders into a private family issue." Before I could respond, the front door swung open again, and 3 more individuals stepped inside. First was Judge Robert Henderson, a tall, dignified man in his 70s, a longtime friend of my grandparents. He was followed by Police Chief Maria Williams, whose daughter's education had been funded by my grandparents' charitable foundation. Lastly, Thomas Jang, my grandparents' financial advisor for over 2 decades, entered the room. My father's complexion drained at the sight of Judge Henderson. The judge had ruled against him in a business dispute years ago, a case my father had tried unsuccessfully to sway through his social connections. "Robert," he said, attempting a cheerful tone that fell flat. "What brings you here?" The judge's demeanor was unyielding. "I am present here at the behest of Harold and Elizabeth Alexander, represented by their attorney, Matthew Goldstein. They requested that I act as an unbiased witness to any family disagreements concerning their estate in the event of their passing." My mother glanced at Chief Williams. "This is absurd. We are here to retrieve family heirlooms that rightfully belong to us. Why is law enforcement involved?" The chief offered a thin smile. "I am here as a friend of the Alexander family, not in an official role, unless, of course, someone commits a crime, in which case my official responsibilities would take precedence." The veiled threat was not lost on any of us. As if on cue, the back door swung open, and 6 additional individuals entered, forming a semicircle behind me. They were longtime employees from my grandparents' business, people who had known my father since he was a child and had witnessed his evolution from a privileged son to an absent family member. "You've got to be joking," Jason muttered. "Is this meant to scare us?" I stepped forward, drawing strength from the support around me. "I understand why you are here. You believe you have a right to my grandparents' estate, despite their clear wishes. You think you can intimidate or coerce me into giving you what you desire." My father's expression hardened. "Those old fools were deceived. We are merely here to rectify that wrong." From behind me, Thomas Jang interjected. "Actually, Leonard, we have documentation of every attempt you made to access your parents' assets over the past 2 decades. He opened a folder. "This includes the unauthorized transfer attempt from their retirement account in 2016, the forged check incident in 2018, and your effort to have Elizabeth declared incompetent last year after she declined to finance Jason's unsuccessful cryptocurrency venture." My father's face turned pale. That is taken out of context." Rosa Martinez stepped forward, tablet in hand. "I also have records of the company loan you never repaid, Leonard. $200,000 was borrowed in 2012 for your vacation home in Aspen. Your parents never sought repayment, even though they certainly had the means to do so." One by one, my grandparents, friends, and acquaintances provided proof of my family's efforts to extract money over the years, juxtaposed with their minimal involvement in my grandparents' actual lives. Aunt Pam, who had been simmering in silence, suddenly turned to me. "You ungrateful little snake. You turned our parents against us, poisoning them with lies." Judge Henderson cleared his throat. "Actually, Mrs. Davis, I reviewed the video journals that Elizabeth maintained. There was no outside influence. Your parents were quite explicit about their reasoning." "This is all very theatrical," my mother said dismissively. "But it changes nothing. We will contest the will. We will prevail." Matthew stepped forward. "I have prepared documentation for all of you. It contains evidence that will become public record if you contest the will." He distributed a thick envelope to each family member. "This includes banking records, text messages, emails, and video evidence of your interactions with Harold and Elizabeth over the last decade. I urge you to examine it before making any decisions regarding legal action." Uncle Steve, who had been quiet until that moment, opened his envelope and began to read. His complexion turned increasingly pale. After a moment, he gently touched Aunt Pam's arm. "We should leave," he said softly. "This is not a battle we can win." She angrily shrugged him off. "My father is not going to give up so easily." However, my father had gone very still after glancing at the contents of his envelope. It contained records of business dealings he had clearly hoped would stay private, along with transcripts of harsh remarks he had made about his parents when he thought no one was listening. Chief Williams stepped forward. "I should also point out that the property is under 24-hour security surveillance. Any attempt to remove items without permission would be considered theft." Carlos nodded. "The new system meticulously records everything, both inside and out, with all data securely backed up in the cloud." As my family processed the implications, I approached the sideboard and picked up a collection of documents that Matthew had prepared. "These are cease and desist orders concerning the threats you've made," I stated, handing them over to Jason. I continued to pass papers to my father, explaining that these are notices indicating my awareness of the items taken from this house after the funeral, and I expect their immediate return. My mother began to object, but I interrupted her. "And these," I said, presenting her with the final document, "outline the terms under which I am willing to maintain any relationship with all of you moving forward. They include honoring my grandparents' wishes and ceasing all attempts to contest the will." The room fell silent as my family grasped the gravity of their situation. Not only had my grandparents legally safeguarded their decisions, but they had also foreseen and documented every potential challenge. The supportive community they had built stood resolutely with me, presenting a united front that my family had not anticipated. My father was the first to speak up. "This isn't over," he declared. However, the defeat in his tone suggested otherwise. "Actually, Leonard, it is," Judge Henderson interjected. "Your parents were thorough in their planning. Any judge in this county would uphold their wishes based on the evidence they gathered." One by one, my family members retreated toward the door, their threats fading in light of the overwhelming evidence against them. Jason shot me a glare as he passed by. "This isn't the end," he hissed. "Perhaps not," I responded calmly. "But it marks the end of your exploitation of this family. My grandparents recognized your true nature. That is why we are all gathered here today." As they exited to their cars, the tension in the room began to lift. Dorothy promptly started serving fresh coffee and pastries, as if to cleanse the atmosphere of the negative energy. The others gathered around, offering their congratulations and support. I felt an odd emptiness, caught between triumph and devastation. I had stood firm, upheld my grandparents' wishes, yet I lost what little remained of my family in the process. The victory felt empty. Judge Henderson seemed to pick up on my inner turmoil. He placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Your grandparents would be proud, Serena, not just for what you accomplished today, but for how you did it with dignity and principle. Rosa nodded in agreement. You resemble them more than anyone else in the family. That is why they entrusted you with everything. As my family's cars faded from view down the driveway, I realized I had crossed a significant threshold. The family I once knew was gone, but in its place stood a community united by genuine respect and shared values. This was the true legacy my grandparents had built over a lifetime. It wasn't the family I was born into, but perhaps it was the family I was always meant to have. 6 months flew by in a whirlwind of learning and adjustment. The initial weeks following the confrontation were the toughest, filled with legal paperwork, financial decisions, and the painful acceptance that my biological family had prioritized money over relationships. They made a few insincere attempts to reconcile, but only when they needed something, proving that nothing had truly changed. With guidance from Matthew and my grandparents' advisors, I established the Elizabeth and Harold Alexander Foundation for Education, dedicating $10 million to support underprivileged students and schools in our community. The foundation particularly focused on arts education and vocational training, areas my grandparents had always believed were undervalued. I returned to teaching kindergarten, much to the surprise of those who thought I would quit once I became wealthy. My classroom at Sunshine Elementary transformed into a showcase for what could be achieved with adequate resources. I personally financed new books, art supplies, and technology that the school budget could never accommodate. Every child received healthy snacks daily and winter coats if they required them. These were minor expenses for me that made a significant impact on their lives. Under the guidance of Rosa Martinez, I grasped the fundamentals of managing Alexander Logistics. Although I did not take on an active management position, I made sure the company upheld my grandparents' values, including their profit-sharing program for employees and generous retirement benefits. The business continued to prosper, providing stable jobs for over 100 individuals in our community. My grandparents' house, once painfully vacant, slowly transformed back into a home. I transitioned from the guest room to the master bedroom, although it took months before I could sleep there without feeling like an intruder. With Carlos's assistance, I converted the spacious basement into a community area for foundation events and educational programs. Dorothy still visited 3 times a week, refusing to fully retire, despite my insistence that she had earned it. My family made sporadic attempts to reconnect, though their intentions were obvious. My father called when his company encountered cash flow issues, subtly suggesting short-term loans with attractive returns. My mother reached out when her social circle discovered my foundation's sudden interest in having her on the board. Jason texted when his latest venture collapsed, seeking startup funds. Aunt Pam called around the holidays, proposing that family should be together, especially those with large homes suitable for hosting gatherings. Each time, I politely but firmly upheld my boundaries, referring them to the terms I had set after our confrontation. I would consider a relationship founded on mutual respect and genuine care, but not one based on financial gain. None of them could meet those straightforward terms. Instead, I established new traditions with the chosen family my grandparents had nurtured. Sunday dinners carried on, now organized by me with a rotating cast of guests including Rosa, Matthew, Carlos and his family, Dorothy, and others who had been part of my grandparents' social circle. We gathered to celebrate holidays, commemorate milestones, and support one another through tough times. Although it wasn't the family I was born into, it felt like a community united by something deeper than blood, shared values and sincere affection. One crisp autumn morning, reminiscent of the day of their accident, I visited my grandparents' graves for the first time since the funeral. I brought fresh flowers and settled on the small bench nearby, finally prepared to have the conversation I had been putting off. I am doing my best to honor what you created, I told them, feeling a bit silly for speaking out loud. The foundation is making a real impact. 3 students have already received full college scholarships who otherwise would not have had the opportunity. Your employees still talk about you with such admiration. A gentle breeze stirred the nearby trees, sending golden leaves swirling down. It was the kind of stunning fall day my grandmother adored, ideal for baking and curling up with a book by the fireplace. I wish you could be here to witness it all, I continued. I have so many questions about the choices you made, the investments you selected, the people you assisted, but I am figuring it out little by little. In the months since I inherited, I discovered many quiet charities my grandparents had supported without revealing their identities. Children whose medical expenses they had covered, families whose homes they had rescued from foreclosure, employees whose children they had helped through college, all without seeking public acknowledgement or praise. Thank you for placing your trust in me, I whispered. I now understand why you made the decisions you did. It was never truly about the money. It was about values, about utilizing resources for something significant rather than for status or power. As I sat there, memories flooded my mind, not with the sharp sting of recent sorrow, but with a bittersweet gratitude for the moments we had shared. I recalled my grandfather teaching me how to fish. My grandmother demonstrated the art of making her renowned apple pie. They both were present at every school play and graduation when my parents were preoccupied. The inheritance was never solely about financial gain. It was about passing down their legacy, their principles, and their vision of how wealth could be utilized with intention and kindness. The following day, I organized the Foundation's inaugural significant event, a scholarship ceremony for 20 high school seniors who would receive full funding for college. As I observed these bright, ambitious young individuals accept opportunities that would alter their life paths, I felt my grandparents' presence strongly. Among the awardees was Maria Vasquez, an exceptional young woman who reminded me of my younger self, brimming with potential yet constrained by financial limitations. She aspired to become a teacher to give back to her community, just as she had been supported. As the event wrapped up, Maria approached me, tears glistening in her eyes. My parents both work 2 jobs, she shared. No one in my family has ever attended college. This changes everything, not just for me, but for my younger siblings who now see it as achievable. In that moment, I fully grasped what my grandparents had been cultivating all along. Not merely a business or a fortune, but a legacy of positive influence, a ripple effect that would persist long after they were gone. They had entrusted me to amplify that impact, to carry their values forward in ways they would never witness but had envisioned. The money had indeed revealed true colors, showing me who prioritized wealth over relationships. Yet, it also unveiled a community of authentic connection, individuals who cherished my grandparents for who they were, not for their possessions. That was the genuine inheritance, far more precious than any monetary value. As I progress, I continue to teach, manage the foundation, and learn the business. The wealth enables me to enhance good work, but it does not define my identity. I continue to lead a fairly simple life, drive a sensible car, and dedicate my weekends to volunteering instead of shopping. I believe my grandparents would be proud of me. They always taught me that money is merely a tool, not an end goal. Now, I finally grasp the meaning behind their words. What has been your experience with family and inheritance? Have you ever felt the need to resist pressure from loved ones to do what you believed was right? I would love to hear your stories in the comments. If this message resonates with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a little encouragement to stand firm. Remember, family should be rooted in love and respect, not in obligation or personal gain. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story, and I wish you the strength to uphold your own values, no matter the challenges you encounter.